Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when bedtime routines involved flickering candlelight, 12 layers of underclothing, and the hopeful boiling of lettuce. Yes, lettuce. Imagine the year is 1875 and you, a respectable Victorian housewife, are standing in your kitchen at midnight, dressing gown tied, hair pinned, and eyes bleary. You're hunched over a kettle, watching soggy romaine leaves swirl sadly in hot water, whispering a silent prayer that this time, the lettuce water will actually help you sleep. It's not exactly chamomile, but according to the many household guides of the era, warm lettuce infusion was considered a gentle sedative, calming the nerves and aiding digestion, which were, of course, the root of all your ills. You sip the watery concoction slowly, trying not to grimace. The taste is somewhere between boiled wallpaper paste and garden hose runoff. But you persist. You always do. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your kitchen is quiet now. Outside, the streets of London are still. Horse hooves silenced hours ago. The gas lamps flickering shadows onto the cobblestones. Inside, the air smells faintly of coal dust and old cabbage. And the walls, decorated with floral wallpaper in a shade called Dead Rose, seem to lean in as if listening. Insomnia isn't a modern invention, you see. But in the Victorian era, it was practically an epidemic, especially for women. Doctors blamed female hysteria, improper digestion, excess reading, and overactive spiritual energies, basically anything except the obvious stress of living in a society that required you to smile politely through your fourth cup of tea while hiding the fact that your corset had bruised a rib. Tonight, like most nights, you've tried everything. You had warm milk and oat biscuits at exactly 8:30. You spent half an hour brushing your hair with exactly 100 strokes. You even paced the drawing room, reciting poetry aloud, as prescribed in the Book of Household Management by Mrs. Beaton herself. But sleep won't come. So, the lettuce, that humble head of romaine in your garden, or perhaps iceberg, if you're one of the more modern households, becomes your last resort. The idea wasn't entirely unscientific. Lettuce contains a compound called Lactucarium, a milky sap thought to have mild sedative effects, and historians still argue whether the trace amounts in a few boiled leaves could do anything more than warm your hands. But in an age when morphine was sold as cough syrup, people were surprisingly cautious when it came to bedtime remedies. You sit near the hearth now, the mug warm in your fingers, and listen to the grandfather clock tick, tick, ticking away the hours. Your house is quiet, though somewhere above, your husband snores softly, blissfully unaware that you're down here sipping vegetable broth in your nightcap and slippers. He had no trouble falling asleep. He never does. Men rarely do. And if they can't, their prescribed whiskey or a walk around the block. You, on the other hand, are handed a stalk of lettuce and told to dwell on nothingness. A breeze creeps in under the door. The flames in the fireplace stutter. You think of your mother, who swore by Valerian root tea, and your neighbor, Mrs. Wentworth, who once tried opium-laced cough drops just to get a nap. She claimed they made her dream of the Queen's garden. You suspect they made her dream of floating above it. The lettuce water is now lukewarm and slightly more bearable. You sip again, willing yourself to relax, to drift, to surrender. Your body begins to ease into the chair, the starch in your gown finally softening. You pull a wool shawl over your lap and close your eyes for a moment, hoping for dreams of something pleasant. Perhaps a seaside stroll or a picnic with jam and currant buns. But your brain, ever helpful, instead offers you a mental list of things to do tomorrow. Laundry, mending, figuring out what's making that strange smell in the pantry. And so, your eyes reopen, and the lettuce water goes cold beside you. Still, there's something oddly comforting about the ritual, the warmth, the pause. The sense that, even if you can't sleep, you're trying. And that must count for something, right? Outside, a dog barks once, then silence again. The street lamps cast long shadows. You shift in your seat and stare at the fading embers in the grate. Your mug is empty now. Whether it helped or not, doesn't matter. You've taken part in a grand tradition, one that will be passed down in whispers, in handwritten herbal guides, and in memory. The night is long. The house is still. You return to bed, just a little less restless than before. And, in a few short hours, the sun will rise. The kettle will whistle again, and you'll be up before anyone else, already preparing another cup of something warm. Back upstairs, the flicker of candlelight dances softly across your floral wallpaper. The room is quiet, save for the faint tick of the clock on your dressing table and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath the thick rug. You tiptoe around your sleeping husband, who snores gently in the carved mahogany bed like a man who's never once considered the anxiety of a roast going cold in front of the vicar. You pull back the heavy lace coverlet and sit on the edge of the bed. Pausing, there's a ritual to all this, a ballet of buttons and bows and laces that precedes every Victorian woman's descent into sleep. Your dressing gown slides off and is folded neatly on the chair. You unpin your hair, letting it fall in soft waves down your back. 100 strokes, again, just to be sure. The bristles of the boar hair brush glide through your locks like a familiar friend, and you count under your breath, each number a small prayer for peace. The bedroom is your sanctuary, but it's not always restful. Everything in it has a purpose, a place, and a protocol. The bed is a towering monument of iron and goose feathers. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair and is somehow both too firm and too lumpy. Still, it's yours. The sheets are crisp and cold, and as you slip between them, you flinch slightly. Warming pans were for the wealthy, or for people with housemaids willing to risk third-degree burns. You are neither. The air smells faintly of lavender sachets, placed lovingly between layers of linen months ago. A sleepy luxury. Beside your bed, a carafe of water, a porcelain chamber pot, just in case, and a slim volume of moral poetry, though reading before sleep is now suspect. According to Dr. Cribbins in last month's Lady's Companion, too much stimulation, he said, could induce racing thoughts or unnatural dreams. Heaven forbid you imagine something. You lie back, arms folded neatly, your spine perfectly aligned, your ankles not daring to cross beneath the blanket lest the devil see it as an invitation. Sleep should be pure, proper, and upright, much like your posture in most things. Still awake? Of course you are. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with nightly routine helped or hindered actual rest. Some believe the rigidity created comfort, a sense of order in a chaotic world. Others argue it simply masked deeper anxieties, the societal expectations, the isolation, the ever-present fear of death by draft or bad oysters. You glance at the candle one last time before snuffing it. The room falls into gentle darkness, not pitch black, never that. You have a low-burning hallway lamp casting a slice of gold under the door. Just enough to comfort you. Just enough to cast strange shapes onto the ceiling. Is that a dancing moth shadow? Or the outline of your bonnet from earlier? You close your eyes, only to open them again. Your mind is still running, through dinner, through the slightly too long conversation with Mrs. Ellison about her gout-ridden Pomeranian, through the letter you forgot to send. And so, you do what many have done before you, adjust the pillow. Not once, not twice, at least 4 times. You fluff it, turn it over. Even try laying your head directly on the mattress for one rebellious minute before realizing you're not a revolutionary. You're just tired. Eventually, your thoughts drift to your friend Agnes, who swears by pine needle infusions. Or was it mugwort? Something vaguely dangerous sounding. She once tried sleeping on a bale of hay to reconnect with Earth's pulse. You suspect she just got tired of the laundry. It's not just your body that resists rest. It's your surroundings. Gaslighting, although a marvel of the age, has disrupted your natural rhythms. You miss the days of candlelit dinners and early evening. Now, you're expected to be alert past 10 p.m., attending late lectures, charity events, and dramatic readings of Ivanhoe. At this rate, insomnia seems less like a medical issue and more like a lifestyle. Your ears perk up at every sound, the distant rattle of a carriage, a wind gust rustling the shutters, your own heartbeat in your ear like a distant drum. You shift again. Maybe lying on your left side will help. You close your eyes and imagine a walk through the conservatory. Ferns brushing your fingertips, the scent of warm soil. A perfect world where no one ever asked you how you managed to get beetroot out of lace. Time slips. You don't know if it's been 5 minutes or 50. Your body is warm now, cocooned. Your breathing slows slightly, and the tension in your jaw starts to release. And then your husband snorts himself awake, mutters something about the Crimean War, and rolls over. Of course, you stare at the ceiling again. It's okay. You've been here before, and you'll be here again tomorrow. But right now, your eyes are growing heavier. The lettuce water may not be a miracle cure, but the effort, the quiet, repetitive steps leading here has nudged you closer to sleep. A little ritual, a small resistance against the buzzing world outside. The bed creaks. Your legs stretch. You let out a long, soft breath. Maybe this is the night it works. The trouble isn't just the bed or the pillow or even the unpredictable temperature swings caused by open chimneys and drafty floorboards. The real trouble, you realize, lies deeper in the rhythm of Victorian life itself. Your days are exhausting, yet somehow your nights remain restless. And as you lie there, staring at the ceiling once more, you begin to understand why. You, a respectable woman in good standing, are simply not allowed to stop. From the moment you rise, often before the sun, you're swept into a tidal wave of tasks. The copper pots need polishing. The linen needs mending. The meat needs boiling. And the children, if there are any, need corralling. Even if you have help, you must manage the help, which is often more stressful than just doing things yourself. And it's not just work. It's the appearance of work. You must look as though everything is effortless. Your dress is starched. Your hands are gloved. Your speech, even at breakfast, must be polite and appropriate. Feelings are things to be tucked neatly beneath the waistband of your corset. Speaking of which, you're still feeling the ghost of yours pressing against your ribs. It's not on now, of course, but your body remembers. It's like muscle memory, but more suffocating. And here's something historians don't always mention. Gaslighting wasn't just a metaphor. Literally, it's everywhere. The soft hiss of the gas lamps has replaced the deep dark that once told humans it was time to sleep. Now the house glows unnaturally long into the night, extending your waking hours whether you want them or not. You think of how this all began, not just tonight, but this whole pattern. Maybe it started the week you stayed up late embroidering handkerchiefs for your cousin's wedding. Or the winter your youngest had whooping cough and you learned to nap upright in a rocking chair, a damp rag on your forehead. Maybe it's older still. Something passed down from your mother, who always had one more thing to do before bed, who never admitted she was tired. Historians still argue whether Victorian women truly suffered more from insomnia or if they simply talked about it more, one of the few ailments polite society allowed. After all, you couldn't discuss your worries about inheritance law or your secret dreams of becoming a writer, but you could say, with a wistful sigh, "I've hardly slept a wink all week." It was both confession and armor. So you lay there, navigating the labyrinth of your thoughts like a quiet revolution in petticoats. And yet, you also recognize a certain camaraderie. You're not alone. Somewhere down the street, your neighbor across the road is probably awake too, boiling her own lettuce leaves or folding and refolding a quilt. You picture her window glowing faintly, and you feel oddly comforted. A secret society of sleepless souls, connected by shared rituals and whispered remedies. You shift again under the quilt. Your feet are cold. You contemplate retrieving your wool socks, but decide against it. Movement would break the delicate balance you've struck with your mattress. Instead, you tuck your toes under the hem of the coverlet and count backwards from 100. Another trick. Each number floats gently past, like a tiny boat on a dark river. 97, 96. You skip 95 entirely because your brain takes a detour. Was that the year Queen Victoria married Albert? Or was it earlier? Queen Victoria, you think of her, of course. The woman whose name defines your era. Did she sleep well, surrounded by attendants, velvet curtains, and morning black? Did grief give her nightmare? Or did she, too, lie awake some nights, staring at embroidered ceilings, listening to the breath of a slumbering empire? You'd like to think so. It would be nice to know that even monarchs battled restless minds, that insomnia wasn't a mark of failure, but of a life too full, too awake, too aware. The room is quieter now. Even the street outside has surrendered to the hush. You begin to drift, not quite asleep, but not fully present either. A soft in-between place where time loses its sharp edges. In this state, you could believe anything, that the lettuce water worked, that your dreams will be sweet, that tomorrow will start with sunshine and a warm biscuit. But just as you begin to float, your mind, ever loyal to its mischief, interrupts with a stray thought. Did I blow out the downstairs candle? Your eyes snap open. Of course you did. Probably. Almost definitely. But the doubt nags. And now your heart beats a little faster. You imagine the house catching fire. The headlines reading, "Woman perishes due to nightly lettuce ritual." And so, sighing, you swing your legs over the side of the bed. The floor is cold. The hem of your nightdress brushes your ankles as you tiptoe across the room. Grab the shawl from the chair and begin the slow descent back downstairs. It's quiet again. You reach the kitchen. The candle is indeed snuffed. Just a stub of wax beside the cold kettle. Relief and mild annoyance battle in your chest. But in the silence, there's something else. Peace. You're the only one awake in your little universe, and that makes you feel oddly powerful. You turn to go back upstairs, a smile tugging at the corners of your mouth. Maybe tonight, at last, sleep will come. You've done your part, and with that, you begin the climb once more. Lettuce water behind you, warm bed ahead. The creak of the stair under your heel is as familiar as the path of your nightly routine. Each groan of the wood a lullaby of habit. Back in bed now, swaddled in wool and hope. You stare once more into the delicate void behind your eyelids. Still, sleep evades you. So you begin to consider other remedies. Downstairs, on a dusty shelf behind the spice tins and pickling jars, lies a small brown bottle you received as a gift last Christmas. Fothergill's Soothing Brain Elixir. The label promises relief for nerves, agitation, sleeplessness, and unsuitable thoughts. You're not sure what counts as unsuitable anymore, but you're willing to bet thinking about slugging your husband with a bed warmer qualifies. The apothecary down the lane sells half a dozen such concoctions, each with stranger names than the last. Night Whisper Tincture, Slumber Syrup, Euphoric Drops. You once bought one labeled simply The Remedy. What it remedies was never clear. Historians still argue whether these elixirs actually soothed or simply numbed. Most contained a cocktail of alcohol, laudanum, a sweet code word for opium, and whatever plant the Victorian imagination deemed vaguely sleepy. You imagine yourself now in the cramped apothecary shop, warmed by the herbal fug and cluttered shelves. The shelves are a strange blend of medicine and magic. Bottles lined up like little soldiers, labeled with everything from lavender essence to powdered mummy. Yes, mummy. Ground-up ancient human remains were once believed to cure all manner of things, including, supposedly, melancholy. Sleep deprivation is a kind of melancholy, isn't it? You never tried the mummy powder, thank heavens, but you did once sample a syrup made with poppy oil and camphor. You don't recall sleeping better, but you did have a vivid dream about dancing with a hedgehog in a top hat. Some women you know swear by sleeping salts, a harsh-smelling powder you inhale deeply until your nose sings. Others believe in rubs and balms made from beeswax and rosemary. Still others sneak small glasses of sherry after supper and pretend it's strictly medicinal. You wonder what future generations will think of all this. Will they chuckle at your lettuce tea and tinctures the way you chuckle at leeches and bloodletting? Probably. But they won't know what it felt like. The way a woman in your time was expected to keep order in everything, the home, the hearth, the heart, and even the nervous system. You're a soldier of the domestic empire, and your battle is fought in hushed tones and candlelight. Sleep is your elusive truce. You settle back. The thought of the elixir tempting but ultimately unnecessary, for now. You're wary of dependence. There are whispered stories of ladies who took a liking to the sweet opiate syrups, who drifted so far into nightly escape they forgot how to return to daytime. One even tried to move into her linen closet, claiming it had better acoustics for her soul. Instead, you recall something your grandmother once said, before her hearing failed and her teapot whistled all day long. If your body won't sleep, then let your mind wander until it forgets how to stay awake. So you do. You start by imagining the hedgerow at the edge of your garden, the way the blackberries turn from tart green to plum dark sweetness. You walk slowly along the path, your basket swinging gently. The breeze carries the scent of rosemary from the herb patch and a hint of chimney smoke from the bakery. Then you think of the cat you had as a child, named Plum, who slept 16 hours a day and judged you for the other 8. You remember the feel of her paw against your cheek as she demanded breakfast at dawn. That cat had no insomnia. But you are not a cat. You are a woman of the Victorian age, dutiful, clever, and always mildly exhausted. Your thoughts drift next to an article in the Ladies' Monthly Intelligencer last season, suggesting wives try guided stillness as a form of rest. It involves lying motionless and imagining one's limbs turning into sand. You gave it a go. It worked until your nose itched and your sand arm reflexively smacked yourself. Still, you try again. You imagine your legs are heavy and full of honey. Your arms, loose and drifting. Your eyelids, weighted with velvet curtains. Your thoughts slow, and for a moment, it feels like it might work, until the house groans again. You smile softly into the darkness. This house has lived many sleepless nights. It holds them in its beams, in the wallpaper seams, in the teacup stains on the floorboards. You are not its first restless dreamer, and you won't be the last. Outside, the moon slides behind a cloud. The street is silent. Not even the cats are prowling now. You are safe, warm, and gently annoyed, but fading. The bottle on the shelf remains unopened. Your eyelids are heavy again. The edges of the room blur. Sleep is not a surrender. It's a slow agreement between body and soul. And you, stubborn as always, may finally be ready to sign. The next morning, you wake with a start, not because of any dramatic event, but because your body has quietly decided it has had enough horizontal time. Light seeps through the heavy curtains, pale and dull, and you blink at the familiar pattern on the ceiling. Sleep must have come sometime after your 5th attempt at imagining yourself as a velvet curtain statue. Progress. As you stretch, gently, so as not to disturb the pins still lodged in your hair from the night before, you consider the strange paradox of it all. You feel both rested and tired, rested in body, tired in soul. But then again, that's the standard Victorian setting for most women. Somewhere between adequately functional and politely unraveling. And by the time breakfast is cleared away and your errands begin, you've already mentioned last night's lettuce ritual to 3 different people. Your maid, who nodded but smirked. Your neighbor, who made a note to try it. And the butcher's wife, who offered you fennel seeds as an alternative. You now have 5 separate suggestions for how to fall asleep, none of which involve actual rest. One suggests counting backward from 500. Another swears by sleeping with a Bible under your pillow. A third recommends reading parliamentary records aloud, though that one, to be fair, might actually work. A fourth told you to place a slice of raw onion under your tongue at bedtime. You're still trying to figure out if that was a serious suggestion or just a cruel prank. But your favorite so far came from your Aunt Edith, who said with absolute conviction, if you can't sleep, simply pretend you're a stone. Stones never worry. You've tried it. Stones may not worry, but they also don't live in homes with creaky floorboards and neighbors who scream at their pigeons at 2 a.m. This is the thing no one tells you about insomnia. It becomes a full-time hobby. You collect rituals the way others collect coins. You start noticing who else has dark circles, who has the faint smell of lavender and desperation on their shawl. You begin to speak in code. Rough night, someone says, and you both nod solemnly. No one needs to say lettuce water aloud. It's implied. And while the search for sleep may be frustrating, it also becomes strangely bonding. A quiet society of the chronically restless. You find camaraderie with the grocer's daughter who recommends buttered toast at 10 p.m. You exchange knowing glances with the librarian who admits she sometimes leaves the reading lamp on all night just to feel less alone. Historians still debate whether insomnia increased during the Victorian era or simply became more visible, more literary, more medicalized, more poetic. Charles Dickens walked miles through London's gaslit streets at night, plagued by his own sleepless mind. Florence Nightingale wrote entire medical treatises during her nocturnal bouts of restlessness. Even the Queen was rumored to host tea at midnight on occasion, though whether it was insomnia or royal boredom remains unclear. And then, there are the more creative solutions. You hear of people who tried musical boxes timed to wind down after 20 minutes, the silence signaling sleep. Others use scented pillows, stuffed with hops and marjoram. One eccentric widow reportedly trained her parrot to say, "Sleep now, dear," every night at 10, whether it worked or not. No one knows. But the parrot became something of a celebrity in Bristol. Your own experiments continue. You try propping your legs on a rolled-up blanket. You try the hot feet, cool head approach. You hum lullabies under your breath like a half-remembered spell. You wear mittens to bed to keep your hands warm. Though your husband now refers to you as Lady Squirrel with annoying fondness. And, of course, you keep returning to lettuce. There's something gentle about it, something unthreatening. It doesn't knock you out. It doesn't steal your dreams. It simply says, let's try again. Tonight, you decide to prepare it earlier, just after supper. The kettle sings, and you add a few sprigs of mint to soften the flavor. You place the mug on your bedside table and sip slowly, letting the warmth settle in your belly as you brush your hair and fold your gown. The moon is rising. The house begins to quiet. Your footsteps echo softly through the hallway. The ticking of the clock returns like an old friend. And as you slide beneath the covers, the familiar ritual wraps around you like a shawl. The cool sheets, the shifting pillow, the slight hope. You close your eyes. A breeze sighs through the window. The room smells faintly of herbs and old books. And somewhere outside, the street lamps glow gently, the world exhaling. You imagine being a stone again, sinking. Still, not worrying. And maybe, just maybe, you start to believe it. But not every Victorian remedy could be described as gentle. In fact, some were downright absurd. Tonight, as you lounge in your nightdress and sip your now customary cup of mint-laced lettuce broth, you recall one particularly ridiculous and oddly fashionable fix for fatigue: arsenic-laced nightwear. Yes, really. You first heard about it in the Ladies' Health Weekly, which ran a lengthy article entitled "The Dangers of Fashionable Dyes." According to their sources and several trembling letters to the editor, many popular green garments of the day, particularly those rich, vibrant emerald silks and velvets, were dyed using compounds containing arsenic. Even wallpaper and artificial flowers weren't safe. The very color of luxury could, in fact, be killing you. Slowly, elegantly, probably while you were attending a ball. And because fashion stops for no one, even at bedtime, some nightgowns and bed linens were produced in these chic shades of green, supposedly to give their wearers a glow of health. In truth, they might have been contributing to unexplained rashes, headaches, or, in some cases, slow poisoning. You shudder to remember the pale green dressing gown you once received as a birthday gift. It looked divine, felt heavenly, and gave you a rash that made your elbows glow like tomatoes. It now lives in the bottom of your wardrobe, banished but too expensive to discard. Historians still debate just how dangerous these arsenic dyes really were. Some argue the levels were too low to cause more than irritation. Others believe they were responsible for far more illness than anyone at the time realized. Either way, you've decided not to take your chances. Lettuce water may be ineffective, but at least it doesn't poison your sweat glands. Your nightwear now consists of a respectable cream-colored cotton gown with tiny pearl buttons and precisely 0 deadly chemicals. It's simple, soft, and frumpy enough to scare away romantic notions, which, frankly, helps when you're trying to sleep. Still, you can't help but marvel at how the Victorian ideal of rest was wrapped in contradiction. On one hand, you were expected to preserve your health through careful diet, prayer, and early nights. On the other, you were also expected to look good doing it, which often meant rubbing lead on your face and sleeping in arsenic green. You think of poor Eleanor Chatworth, who reportedly tried a complexion cure that involved sleeping with a raw beef poultice on her cheeks. She claimed it cooled the nerves and brightened her skin. Her husband claimed it ruined their pillows. There were also fashionable sleep corsets. Yes, corsets for sleeping. Because heaven forbid your waist relax even while unconscious. These were marketed as resting stays and advertised as essential for maintaining feminine form. You tried one once. It lasted 7 minutes before you yanked it off and threw it across the room like a rejected eel. You wonder if the men of the era ever considered such things. Likely not. Most of them slept in long flannel shirts, snored with impunity, and considered themselves paragons of discipline for merely refraining from cheese before bed. Your husband, for example, remains perfectly content to tumble into bed without ceremony, fall asleep in under 3 minutes, and claim the next morning that his dreams involved nothing more exciting than a goose. You, on the other hand, have to consider every variable: temperature, lighting, pillow density, fabric weight, ambient sound, and whether your recent anxiety about the price of cinnamon will manifest as a full-blown nightmare. Still, you find ways to cope. You add a drop of rose oil to your pillowcase. You read 1 page of Pilgrim's Progress, just enough to bore your mind into drowsiness. You position your feet in the exact orientation they seem to like. Toes just peeking past the edge of the blanket like little pale scouts. And somewhere in that small, sacred space between wakefulness and dreams, you find yourself slipping, not into unconsciousness exactly, but into a calm place, a place where the mattress creaks less, the wind doesn't rattle the windows, and your thoughts behave themselves for once. You dream, briefly, of a field of lettuce. Each leafy head glows faintly under the moonlight. You're walking barefoot, the ground cool beneath your feet. And someone, maybe your grandmother, maybe Queen Victoria herself, is handing you a porcelain teacup filled with steaming herbal brew. You sip. It tastes not terrible. And then, just before waking, you hear someone say, very gently, "The green dye was optional." You smile as your eyes flutter open. Morning again. Still tired. Yes, but somehow lighter. You sit up slowly, stretch, and think about what new remedy you might try tonight. Maybe fennel seeds. Maybe guided stillness. Maybe, if you're feeling brave, an entire page of parliamentary records. But you already know where you'll begin. With lettuce. It's midday now, and the sun peeks out from behind the London smog with an expression not unlike your own, vaguely alert, mildly annoyed, but trying its best. You're seated by the window with a teacup in hand. Not of lettuce this time, but a brisk Darjeeling with 2 cubes of sugar and a splash of milk, because you've earned it. Your fingers absent-mindedly trace the delicate floral pattern along the edge of the saucer as you reflect on how your sleeplessness has become an entire character in your life. It's not just something you experience. It's something you plan for, accommodate, even nurture in strange ways. Like a fussy houseguest who never leaves, you sigh, lean back in the chair, and remember the most theatrical part of the Victorian battle against sleeplessness, the nap. Oh, how you once resisted it. A proper woman should be industrious, attentive, alert from dawn till dusk, sure at least until tea time. But one day, when your neighbor Miss Tillingham confessed to resting her eyes after luncheon and described it with such velvet pillow enthusiasm, you gave in. It was glorious. You lay down fully dressed, stockings still on, corset only slightly loosened, and drifted into a nap so pure, so gentle, that you woke with an imprint of the sofa fringe across your cheek and not a single regret in your soul. Since then, the afternoon rest has become a carefully curated ritual. You never call it a nap. Of course, it's reclining for restorative purposes, and only between 2 elk and 2:30. Any longer, and you risk entering what you've dubbed the twilight of confusion, that awful foggy state where you forget what year it is and can't tell if you've missed supper or just daydreamed it. Historians still debate whether Victorian women were genuinely more tired than their modern counterparts, or if they simply had more rules about when and how one could be tired. After all, a nap was permissible only under certain conditions: illness, mourning, pregnancy, or severe embroidery fatigue. Still, the nap developed its own etiquette. You were to rest in a semi-upright position, with at least one decorative pillow propped behind your back. You could not fully disrobe, that would be scandalous. But you could remove your shoes. You must have a light shawl on hand. preferably one crocheted by an aunt or a woman with strong opinions about lace. And, of course, you must look lovely while doing it. Napping was a performance, especially if guests might drop by. You practiced falling asleep with your mouth closed and your chin at a flattering angle, just in case someone peeked in and mistook your repose for spiritual contemplation. You tried once to nap lying on your front, arms splayed, snoring gently into a velvet cushion. You awoke to find a maid staring at you in horror, assuming you'd expired. You haven't napped face down since. Today, however, you feel the old tug again, a little pocket of weariness blooming behind your eyes. You glance at the clock, 2:12. Perfect. You arrange yourself on the chaise lounge beside the window, the one with the lumpy armrest and the suspicious stain you've artfully hidden with a folded shawl. Your skirt rustles as you tuck it modestly to one side, and you draw the lace curtain just enough to diffuse the light into a soft, cloudy haze. The house is quiet. The kettle has stopped hissing. The children, should you have them, are off with the governess or perhaps at their embroidery samplers, pretending to behave. The dog, if applicable, snores softly under the sideboard. You close your eyes. You take a breath. You imagine once again that you're a stone. No, not a stone. Today, you're a cat, curled in the sun, ears twitching, dreams filled with birds and unearned affection. The nap steals over you like fog across the moors, slow, unannounced, and oddly cinematic. And then, bang. The postman slams the gate. You jerk awake, disoriented, dress wrinkled, mouth dry, and immediately forget what year it is. You've fallen into the twilight of confusion after all. You sit up slowly, blinking. The saucer is still in your hand. The tea is cold. The moment is gone. Still, it counts. Even a brief doze has softened the edge of your fatigue. Your bones ache slightly less. Your eyelids don't fight you as much. You feel functional, like a freshly wound clock. You brush the fringe imprint from your cheek, smooth your hair, and rise. There's a pie to prepare and a list of letters to write. But first, you return the teacup to the tray and make a mental note to try fennel in your lettuce water tonight, just for variety. You pause at the mirror in the hallway. Your reflection stares back, slightly wrinkled, slightly smirking, completely unconvinced that tonight will be the night you sleep 8 hours straight. But who needs 8? You've survived on less. You functioned on crumbs of rest and spoonfuls of hope. And besides, there's always the nap. You tuck a lock of hair behind your ear, square your shoulders, and rejoin the world of the conscious with all the grace of a woman who's just dreamed of being a cucumber. Evening returns with a kind of soft, creaking inevitability. The sun disappears behind the rooftops with barely a farewell, and gas lamps blink to life across the street like sleepy fireflies in corsets. Dinner has come and gone, boiled meat, limp carrots, polite conversation, and the inevitable confession that you simply didn't sleep well last night. Your husband mumbled sympathetically and then launched into a tale about railway timetables, which you pretended to find riveting. But your mind was already drifting, floating toward the moment you'd be free to return to your little nighttime theater of sleep preparation. Before that, though, there is the doctor. Once a month, he makes his visit, a respectable man with sideburns that seem to defy the laws of grooming. He arrives with a black leather bag, a faint odor of camphor, and an uncanny ability to say in 10 subtly different tones. He checks your pulse, frowns slightly, asks if you've been eating enough marrow, and then leans back in his chair as though he's just solved the mysteries of the human soul. Tonight, you mention your sleeplessness again, not dramatically, just a casual aside. Still having trouble falling asleep some nights, you murmur. As you gently stir your tea, he perks up. Well, you must stop reading before bed, and certainly no writing in your diary. It excites the imagination. He also advises you to avoid spicy foods. You haven't had anything spicier than boiled parsnip in 3 weeks. Strenuous thinking, or any activities that might result in a raised pulse, such as playing croquet too enthusiastically. And then, with great seriousness, he recommends a course of Turkish baths and, this is real, raw eggs stirred into warm port wine. You nod, you smile, you do not laugh. You are a Victorian woman, after all, and suppressing your true feelings is half your personality. Historians still argue whether Victorian doctors knew anything about sleep, or whether they simply rotated through a list of safe-sounding things to say. One medical journal recommended lying in a hammock strung between 2 orange trees. Another prescribed a diet consisting solely of boiled turnips and a daily lecture on Protestant ethics. You've learned to filter the nonsense from the maybe helpful. No baths after 9 p.m. That makes sense. Avoid violent novels like Frankenstein before bed? Sure. But the suggestion that a headband soaked in vinegar will quell the racing mind, that one's on your personal list of comedy favorites. The doctor leaves. Eventually, his parting words are, as always, "Don't worry so much," which is the 19th century equivalent of telling a drowning person to just float. Still, his visit gives you a reason to indulge in your favorite part of the night, making sleep look like something sacred. Back in your bedroom, you dim the lamps. You fluff the pillows. You select the least lumpy nightgown. You brush your hair with slow, deliberate strokes, letting the scent of rose oil drift upward like a tiny personal rebellion. And tonight, just for curiosity, you try the raw egg and port suggestion, not to drink it, but to simply hold it in your hand for a moment, as if daring it to solve anything. It does not. It just sloshes unpleasantly. Into the sink it goes. Then comes the ritual of arranging the bed. The hot water bottle, not too hot. The quilt, folded back halfway. The novel you're not supposed to read, left conveniently within reach. The lettuce water, this time with fennel and a dash of honey. You've convinced yourself the bitterness is a sign it's working. You sit on the edge of the bed and look around your room. It's changed, subtly. since you first began this journey. Not physically, no, but in meaning. The curtains don't just block light. They shield you from the gaze of a world that never quite slows down. The ticking clock doesn't just mark time. It reminds you that it's your time, for once. Time to be still, to not perform, to not please. The walls know your secrets. The carpet remembers your pacing. The window frames your hope. You lie back. The linen is cool. The air carries the faint scent of fennel and coal smoke. The world narrows, quiets. Tonight, sleep may come, or it may not. You've begun to realize that, like most things, sleep isn't always something to conquer. It's something to accompany, to sit beside and wait for, gently, like a cat that only curls up in your lap if you stop reaching for it. Your thoughts slow, your body sinks. Your breath steadies. You've tried the doctor's methods, the neighbor's advice, the strange teas and sleepy corsets. But the thing that helps most is simply knowing that tomorrow you'll try again. Sleep is not a destination, it's a visitor. And tonight, you've left the door open. You wake just before dawn, not because you're well rested, mind you, but because the milkman is unusually enthusiastic with his deliveries. Somewhere outside, a bottle clinks against a step like a polite explosion, and a dog, possibly yours, possibly your neighbor's, barks with operatic passion. You groan, but not loudly. Victorian women don't groan, they sigh eloquently. The room is still cloaked in that early morning gray that blurs edges and softens regrets. You shift under the covers, unsure whether to get up or attempt the treacherous art of second sleep. A delicate phase between 5 a.m. and full consciousness, where dreams are more vivid, but twice as likely to feature disappointing meals or unfinished knitting projects. You choose stillness. You stare at the ceiling and think. Last night's fennel-infused lettuce water didn't seem to change the course of your dreams. But you did sleep. At least, better. Maybe 3 full hours before your usual tossing resumed. Or maybe it was just the sense of doing something. The comfort of ritual over chaos. It strikes you that your entire household is designed to keep things running smoothly during the day. But very little attention is given to the night. The darkness belongs to those left alone with their thoughts. And for many women, that's the first time all day you're allowed to think freely. Of course, thinking freely comes with its own side effects. Suddenly, every unanswered letter, every missed chore, every ambiguous look from a neighbor over the garden wall replays in your mind, like a tragic stage performance with no intermission. And what do you do when your own brain refuses to let you rest? You sit up, you light a candle, and sometimes, yes, you admit it, you write. The little notebook hidden in your drawer isn't a diary exactly. That would be far too sentimental. It's a collection of nighttime thoughts, scribbles, dream fragments, and musings on the psychological implications of lettuce-based pharmacology. You open to a fresh page and begin. 4:48 a.m. I may never know whether fennel helps, but it does make me feel French. You continue, writing whatever surfaces, A recipe your aunt once swore cured her hiccups. A poem about socks. A passing thought about whether Queen Victoria ever tried pickled asparagus before bed. Probably not, but maybe. Historians still argue whether nighttime writing helped Victorian women cope or quietly fueled their insomnia. Some believe it served as an outlet for suppressed creativity. Others claim it simply gave form to anxiety. Either way, the pages in your notebook are growing, your own private volume of sleepless truths. Eventually, the candle burns low, and the words slow down. Your body relaxes, and instead of crawling back into bed, you take the old wool shawl from the chair and wrap it around your shoulders like a cloak. You pad softly down the hallway toward the parlor, where the fire has long gone out and the room is lit only by the pale, ghostly glow of the window. You curl up in the armchair, the one that creaks just enough to feel alive. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel completely still. The world hasn't woken yet. No one is asking anything of you. Your hair is loose. Your hands are warm. Your thoughts, for once, are not racing toward disaster. You're just here, and in that gentle silence, you finally drift off. Only for 10 minutes. But they are a perfect 10. You wake with a crick in your neck and a string of drool you'll later deny ever happened. But you also wake with a small, glowing sense of victory. You did it. You slept in the armchair. Yes, and fully clothed, but sleep nonetheless. Later, as the house stirs and the kitchen begins to clatter with breakfast preparation, you return to your room, pour yourself a bit of water, and smile. You'll make your lettuce tea again tonight. Of course you will. Because sleep, for you, is not a conquest. It's a companion. A shy one. Slow to trust. Fond of strange herbs and unpredictable timings. But you've learned how to wait. You've learned how to listen. And above all, you've learned that some victories come not in 8 hours of perfect sleep, but in 10 sacred minutes of peace. By midday, you've forgotten the details of your short nap in the parlor. But the sensation lingers, a bit like the scent of lavender clinging faintly to a shawl. You feel just steady enough to face the day's duties. The pantry inventory must be taken. The maid needs direction on the silver polish. And the drawing room rug, according to Aunt Wilhelmina, has developed a visible list to port, which is her poetic way of saying it's crooked again. Yet as you go about these tasks, you carry something with you, a quiet pride. You are no longer simply a victim of your sleeplessness. You are now something of a scholar in the field, an amateur sleepologist, if you will. You've tried tinctures, elixirs, routines, and raw eggs briefly. You've read poetry by candlelight and stared at ceilings until they blurred into existential wallpaper. And through it all, you've discovered something important. Insomnia, in your world, is oddly social. It turns out that among Victorian women, the topic of poor sleep is one of the rare ailments considered suitable for discussion. Unlike financial trouble, marital strain, or opinions on corset reform, Everyone seems willing to talk about their nightly struggles. In fact, at your weekly sewing circle, last night's rest has become the unofficial opening line for every conversation. Still waking at 3 a.m., says Mrs. Appleby, pulling a needle through a stubborn seam. Try turning your pillow sideways, suggests Miss Pennyman. I've been doing that since Tuesday and haven't screamed into the void once. Have you tried lamb's tongue tea? Asks another. No one drinks it anymore, but it used to knock my grandmother right out. They compare symptoms the way some people compare seasonal vegetables. Dry mouth, probably the salts. Racing thoughts? Avoid Dickens after dark. Dreams of falling into wells full of talking kittens? That one might be unique to you. Historians still argue whether this communal complaining fostered support or simply normalized chronic fatigue, but you find it oddly comforting. For once, no one is pretending everything is fine. Everyone is tired. Everyone is trying. And there's something beautiful in that collective shrug toward the absurdity of it all. And then, of course, there are the letters. You've begun corresponding with a cousin in Bath who also suffers from intermittent night fidgets. Her letters arrive weekly, always penned in the early hours, full of wry observations and terrible ideas for sleep tonics. She once suggested chewing on lavender stems while humming a hymn backward. You tried it. Briefly. The results were inconclusive but aromatic. Together, you've developed a kind of sleepless sisterhood. You swap herbal recipes, recommend bedtime readings, and rate the soothing qualities of different embroidery patterns. Tulips, calming. Thistles, agitating. There's also the pamphlet you ordered from London, The Philosophy of Sleep and Gentle Repose, written by a retired chimney sweep with surprisingly elegant prose. In it, he compares falling asleep to rowing away from the shore of noise into a foggy cove of peace. You liked that. You underlined it. You copied it into your notebook. And as the sun begins its slow descent once again, you begin the nightly preparations with a little more optimism than usual. You fluff your pillows. You warm your toes near the grate. You steep your lettuce tea tonight with a twist of lemon peel, which feels almost exotic. You adjust your shawl. Open the window just a crack to let in the scent of rain-soaked stone, and take your place once again in the quiet theater of hopeful rest. Tonight, you think, perhaps I won't even need the full routine. Tonight, maybe I'll read one page of dull moral poetry and simply drift. Or maybe I'll wake at 2:43 a.m., write a sonnet about cabbage, and drink broth under a blanket again. Either way, I'll manage. I always do. Because sleep isn't something I lack, it's something I court. Like a fussy aristocrat who only arrives when you stop trying to impress her. And I'm getting rather good at knowing when to bow. There's a certain poetry to the hour just after dusk, when the light shifts from gold to blue and the world feels like it's exhaling. You find yourself standing by the window again, watching as chimneys sigh their last curls of smoke into the settling sky. The neighbors' lamps flicker to life, one by one, like cautious stars in a sky too shy for full darkness. You cradle your warm mug, tonight's lettuce tea infused with chamomile and the tiniest dab of honey, because a friend claimed it confuses the bitterness. You're not convinced, but it sounds scientific enough to try. Your body aches, not sharply, but in that familiar foggy way that comes from having too many responsibilities and too few naps. You rub your temples, not because it helps, but because you once read it gives the impression of control. This evening, you reflect on the stranger methods Victorians used to tempt sleep. Not just lettuce water or warm milk or moral poetry, but things that toe the line between science and something more theatrical. You once attended a society lecture on the importance of magnetic forces in domestic repose. A well-meaning gentleman in plaid trousers declared that placing magnets near the headboard could align one's inner energies. He waved around a compass, 2 iron rods, and a velvet bag full of soothing stones. The room applauded. Your friend Esther tried it. Her sleep did not improve, but her hairpins began sticking to the wall, which was entertaining for a week. Another popular trend? Sleeping beneath copper wire lattices to catch celestial vibrations. That one pamphlet you read insisted it improved dreams and warded off sinister thoughts brought on by the moon. You were tempted to try it until you imagined explaining to your husband why the bed now resembled a cheese grater. And then there was the hypnotist. Yes, that happened. He came highly recommended by Mrs. Langford, who insisted he had cured her of migraines and nightly nosebleeds with nothing but a pocket watch and his tone. You met with him one Thursday afternoon in a drawing room that smelled suspiciously of cloves and male confidence. He instructed you to sit, breathe, and release the mind from the tyranny of structure. You tried. You really did. But the only thing that got released was a small, accidental giggle when he whispered, "You are becoming a cloud." Still, something about it stayed with you. Not the suggestion, but the quiet, the attention. The idea that maybe, just maybe, the mind can be talked into calmness if one speaks softly enough. Historians still argue whether Victorian mesmerists were earnest healers or charming frauds. Either way, they were part of the era's ongoing attempt to wrestle the unruly beast of sleeplessness into submission using anything but rest itself. And somehow, in all that fumbling and fidgeting, you begin to see the common thread. No one knows exactly how sleep works. Not then, not now. But the human instinct to chase it, gently, desperately, creatively, is as old as the beds we lie in. You set your mug down on the table beside your bed and fluff your pillow into something resembling dignity. The sheets are cool. The quilt is heavy in the good way, the way that makes you feel swaddled instead of suffocated. You lie down, arms crossed over your middle like a saint, awaiting transport to heaven. Or at least to the land of Nod. Your eyes drift to the ceiling. You try the old visualization trick. A gentle river, a small boat. The moonlight painting ripples like silver thread. You're rowing, slowly. You have nowhere urgent to be. The current is kind, You wonder briefly if the hypnotist would approve of this image. Probably not enough clouds, but you are floating now, away from the weight of the room, away from the bustle and the tea and the pamphlets and the vibrating copper bed frames. You are alone with the soft rush of your breath and the slow exhale of your thoughts. You do not know if you will sleep, but you are ready, and that is enough. Because this too is a kind of sleep, a prelude, a hush, a willingness to welcome rest without demanding it. The moon creeps along the edge of your curtain. Somewhere a clock ticks, and you close your eyes, just in case. You awake, not with a jolt, but with the curious sensation of returning from somewhere vague and unfinished. A half-dream clings to your memory, something about trying to knit a blanket from clouds, while a goose offered you advice on pillow alignment. Comforting, if odd. It's just past midnight. The room is hushed. The house has settled into its bones, groaning softly in the rafters like an old man stretching in his sleep. The candle you left burning low has become a stub, haloed in a golden pool of wax. Your eyes adjust slowly, the world returning in quiet pieces. Your first thought, did I fall asleep on my own? Your second thought, that can't be right. But there it is. The unmistakable impression of time past, of drifting, of rest. Maybe not deep, perfect, dreamless sleep, but enough to make you feel like something shifted. You shift too. Propping yourself on one elbow and surveying your surroundings with the sleepy suspicion of a woman not used to success in this department. The tea mug sits empty beside you. Your notebook remains closed. The window is slightly ajar, letting in a breeze that carries the scent of distant chimney smoke and something faintly sweet. Baker's yeast. Perhaps. It's tempting to celebrate. To leap from bed and declare victory with a triumphant, I did it. But you know better. Sleep, like a cat, dislikes loud noises and sudden movement. So you remain still, basking in the glow of your achievement as quietly as possible. And yet, despite the progress, your thoughts begin to churn. Why now? What changed? Was it the chamomile? The hypnotic visualization? The sheer exhaustion from navigating a world where every curtain must be embroidered and every emotion folded into politeness? No matter. It worked. Or half worked. And half of a good sleep is worth more than a full night of tossing in Victorian despair. You glance toward your husband, who remains motionless and blissfully unaware. His snores rising and falling like the bellows of an indifferent blacksmith. He has never once boiled a lettuce leaf. He has never sat cross-legged in the drawing room, wondering if fennel promotes dreams or night sweats. He sleeps like someone who believes the universe will carry him safely through the night. It's infuriating. Still, tonight, you're not entirely jealous, not bitter, just quietly victorious. You too, have stolen a moment of peace from the jaws of your restless mind. Historians still debate whether Victorian sleep was ever truly restful. With the constant noise of industry, the threat of fire from open flames, and the overwhelming number of things filled with arsenic, rest was often aspirational. Yet here you are, part of a legacy of women who have learned to survive, even thrive, on the odd and fragmentary nature of nighttime. You swing your legs gently out of bed, your bare feet finding the rug. There's a restlessness in your limbs that calls not for pacing, but for quiet ritual. You head to the wash basin, pour a little cool water into the bowl, and dab your face. Not to wake up, just to soothe. You catch your reflection in the glass. Soft hair tousled, eyes puffy but peaceful. A woman who is trying, and that, more than anything, is the heart of your journey. You return to bed and reach for the little notebook. With care, you scrawl a line. Sleep arrived at 11:38. Did not knock. You smile at your own joke, close the cover, and settle back into the warm hollow your body has made in the mattress. You lie on your side this time, knees drawn in slightly. The blanket wraps around you like a thoughtful companion. Outside, the wind rustles the ivy clinging to the eaves. Somewhere in the distance, a horse snorts, its hooves clopping against cobblestone as it turns toward home. You breathe slowly, letting your thoughts drift again, not toward solutions, not toward conclusions, just away. There is no urgency, no remedy to reach for, no potion to sip, no clock to check, just stillness, just now, and the understanding that even in an age of bustle and bustle's cousin, fuss, you found a way to be still, even for a while. Your eyes close. If sleep returns, it will find you waiting, not begging. You have done your part. You wake again later this time, closer to morning. The world has shifted from deep night to that pale, half-lit limbo before sunrise, when rooftops look like watercolor silhouettes and every sound feels hushed, as though even the birds haven't quite decided whether to begin. You stretch slowly, not daring to hope. But yes, your limbs feel heavier, your mind less fogged with the staccato static of broken sleep. You may have done it, not all at once, not in some perfect, dream-laden swoon, but enough. You sit up carefully, avoiding the creaky board by the nightstand. The air is cool, but the blanket has clung to your warmth like an old friend. For a moment, you just sit there in the blue-tinged quiet, unsure whether to rise or savor. Your gaze lands on the old journal again, its spine softened by so many nights like this one. You flip it open and add another line. Unclear when I fell asleep, woke with no poem in mind. A success. Later today, you'll return to the world. There will be tea to brew and silverware to polish and a drawer full of stockings that seems to tangle itself just to spite you. But right now, here in this liminal hour, you are suspended between the effort of trying and the ease of having tried. It occurs to you that all your remedies, your lettuce water, your nightly walks around the parlor, your increasingly absurd tea blends are not failures when they don't work. They're simply love letters to yourself, gentle attempts. Proof that you care enough to keep hoping. You remember, with a sleepy smile, One of the oddest pieces of advice ever shared in your sewing circle. If you can't sleep, try placing a cold spoon under your pillow and whispering a secret to it. No one knew where the practice came from. Possibly Irish, possibly invented by Miss Pennington during one of her theatrical moods. You tried it once. Whispered a confession about wanting to cut your hair scandalously short. The next morning, you woke with a sore neck and a spoon imprint on your cheek, but you also felt heard. Historians still argue whether sleep rituals have more to do with psychology or physiology, but you've long suspected they're mostly about comfort. Not the comfort of the body, but of the self, of being kind to yourself when your body refuses to cooperate. You stand and wrap your shawl around your shoulders. The kettle's likely cold, but you light the stove anyway, moving with the gentle precision of someone who no longer minds these early hours. There's something sacred about this time. No expectations. No interruptions, just the quiet hum of a world not quite awake. As the water begins to warm, you watch the window turn pink at the edges. Dawn is creeping in like an apology for the long night. You prepare your morning tea, not lettuce this time, just black, strong, and honest. You sip it while standing, watching the light settle into the corners of the room, watching the shadows tuck themselves neatly under furniture like good little guests. And you smile, because even in the haze of fatigue, you feel a shift, not a solution, but a rhythm, one you're learning to trust. Sleep is a dance partner with no clear choreography, but you're no longer stepping on its toes quite so often. And when it does arrive, whether after 3 hours or 13 tries, you'll welcome it without fanfare, without frustration, without spoons under your pillow, probably, just with readiness, and maybe a cup of slightly too strong tea. The new day rolls in with the casual audacity of a child kicking over your neatly arranged dominoes. A knock at the front door. The clatter of breakfast plates. Someone somewhere, probably the grocer's boy, yells "marmalade" as if it's an emergency. And so begins your return to the living. You are not entirely rested, but you are not exhausted either. And in your world, that's a win. The day proceeds in familiar patterns. You tidy. You supervise. You navigate social niceties with the skill of a diplomat avoiding war over cold tea. Yet something is different. A softness lingers in your limbs, a clarity in your thoughts. You've had just enough sleep to feel possible. And so, during your mid-morning walk through the garden, bonnet tied loosely under your chin, shoes brushing dew from the flagstones, you begin to think more deeply about the women who came before you. Your great-grandmother, perhaps, who slept on straw mattresses and thought a boiled onion was a miracle cure. Or your mother, who swore by Valerian drops and the sound of distant church bells. Or your cousin, who tried every method imaginable, including sleeping with an iron horseshoe under her pillow to attract grounding forces. She claimed it worked. Her dreams improved. Her posture did not. You wonder if they, too, lay awake some nights, thinking about sleep the way poets think about love. Mysterious, fleeting, entirely irrational. and yet wholly worth pursuing. Historians still argue whether the Victorians truly suffered from more sleeplessness or whether they simply documented it more. After all, you've written countless notes in your journal, annotated cookbooks with "not ideal for late suppers," and even once scratched a sleepy haiku into the margin of the Pilgrim's Moral Primer. There is something deeply human about turning struggle into story, about crafting meaning from the nonsense of 3 a.m. Your own narrative has evolved, no longer a helpless battle against restlessness, but a quiet, persistent ballet of self-care. The lettuce water, once your desperate ritual, has become something gentler, comforting not for its chemistry, but for its constancy. Like a friend who always shows up, even if they forget their umbrella and talk too much about their cat. You've come to understand something else, too. Not all wakefulness is bad. Some of it is useful, sacred, even. How many ideas, letters, poems, and plans are born in the hush of night? How many moments of clarity? You've remembered birthdays at 2 a.m. that would have otherwise passed unnoticed. You've designed entire rearrangements of your sitting room under the influence of candlelight and chamomile. You once solved a pie crust mystery in your sleep. Well, almost in your sleep. And even when nothing productive emerges, the simple act of being still, of being, is enough. You no longer measure your nights by hours slept, but by how gently you moved through them. Tonight, you'll begin the dance again. Not because you expect a perfect 8 hours, but because ritual matters. So you'll warm the water, you'll slice the lemon, you'll select the least offensive teacup from the shelf and allow yourself to believe that maybe, just maybe, tonight will be the night sleep shows up on time. And if it doesn't, you'll write another haiku, you'll adjust your pillow, you'll stare at the ceiling and wonder if it's time to add nutmeg to your routine. Because you're no longer afraid of insomnia. You know her name now. You know her habits. And she, in turn, is beginning to respect yours. You walk back into the house, the morning light now filling the hallway. The day awaits. But for the first time in a long while, it doesn't feel like an uphill climb. It feels like a quiet companion beside you. And you carry with you the knowledge that when night returns, you will meet it not with fear, but with familiarity. The teacup will be warm, the sheets will be cool, and the rest will come when it's ready. Evening again. The sky folds itself into deeper shades of blue, and the lamplighter makes his rounds outside, illuminating the street one flickering flame at a time. You stand at the kitchen hearth, ladle in hand, as steam curls from the small pot of lettuce tea steeping gently on the stove. You've perfected the ratio now. 2 leaves, 1 sprig of mint, a ribbon of lemon peel, and a level spoonful of stubborn hope. You pour the mixture into your favorite teacup, the one with the tiny chip on the handle that fits your finger just right. The scent rises to meet you, earthy, soft, oddly reassuring. You've stopped expecting it to knock you unconscious. Now it's something else entirely, a signal. A small act of kindness to yourself that says, "We're doing it again. We're still here, still trying." You make your way to the bedroom, where your bed waits in the dim, familiar light of a half-turned lamp. The pillow has been fluffed, the quilt folded back just so. On the bedside table, your journal, a folded scrap of lace, and a matchbox of dreams unlit. And beside it all, your victory, the spoon. Not under the pillow tonight, but placed gently next to the cup, as a reminder. You never needed superstition, you only needed care. You sip the tea slowly. You feel the weight of the day ease off your shoulders, like a coat you didn't realize you were still wearing. There are no more tasks to be done, no one to impress, just you. The silence, and the slow rhythm of letting go. You remember the dream from last night, half-formed but oddly peaceful. A field, a stream, the sound of fabric flapping in a breeze that smelled faintly of rosemary. You wonder if dreams have flavors, if they are built from the leftover crumbs of the day. You hope tonight's dream is made of warmth and softness and possibly just a little gingerbread. Historians still debate whether dreams were taken seriously in the Victorian era, but you've long decided they matter to you, not for what they mean, necessarily, but for the simple fact that they show up. That even in the absence of perfect sleep, your mind still tries to hand you stories. You settle under the covers. Your feet find their familiar place. Your breath slows. The clock ticks its soft metronome of surrender. And in this moment, quiet, undramatic, beautifully ordinary, you feel it. Rest, not perfection, not peace eternal, but rest in the shape of a pause, a deep breath, a flicker of surrender. You smile faintly. This is enough. You reach for your journal one last time and scrawl. Night 37, still tired, still hopeful, still here. And then you close your eyes. Now, let yourself drift. Let the teacup cool. Let the candle burn low. Let the worries that clung to your collar slip gently to the floor. You're no longer in the world of doing. You've arrived in the quiet country of being. No tasks, no expectations, only breath, in and out. The room around you fades into softness. The sheets are no longer fabric. They are clouds. The pillow cradles not just your head, but all the cluttered thoughts you've chosen to set down for the night. Imagine the kettle cooling on the stove, the last light going out, the house sighing into silence. You are part of that silence now, floating, weightless. And if your mind wanders, that's all right. Just bring it back to the gentle rhythm of breath, of stillness, of being enough, exactly as you are, in this moment. You have tried. You have shown up for yourself. You have given the night its due, and it has given you a moment of peace in return. Let the ticking clock sing its lullaby. Let the moonlight brush your eyelids. Let the world wait. For now, all you need to do is rest. You are safe. You are warm, and you are already halfway to sleep. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.